Hi, Edward. Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you, Orlando. Hi.
Well, first, before talking about the movie, I'd like to know when did you know that you want to be a director?
Oh, that's a really interesting story. I grew up in Wolfsburg, in a city where they make Volkswagens, where they make cars. So movie making really wasn't, it wasn't a job that I knew about. I thought like I loved the movies, I loved going to the movies, but I thought the actors made the movie. I didn't know there was a director or a producer or a writer or cinematographer, none of it. And then at 15, I went to the local art school or like one city over to where they had an art school and they had a film course. And I went home and I said to my brother, I said like, oh, you can make movies. You can learn how to make movies there. And he said, oh, you're gonna have to drive a cab later on. And then I thought, oh, it's my bigger brother. He's
Mhm.
probably right. So I pushed that idea aside and then when 3 years later, when my father kind of pushed me to decide on what to make, I thought I wanted to become an engineer like him and like my brothers. And then suddenly I realized I can't do it. So at 18, I decided I want to be making movies.
Wow. And at that time, do you have any favorite movie director, actor that you inspires you?
My favorite movie was Apocalypse Now because it was a movie that I didn't know how it worked. I knew movies that told me a story. It had a plot from A to Z, and it told me that story, and I could be entertained by it. Apocalypse Now was the first movie that I saw that didn't have a real story. It didn't. You needed to more feel it. You needed to. It's more like a poem. It's more like expressionistic painting trying to capture the essence of war, basically. And that really impressed me that you could basically, make poetry with movies.
You decide to be a director, but how do you reach to your first movie?
Um, I was working in New York for a company called Good Machine, and I was offered a job like that where I was able to make much more money. And my boss took me to lunch and said, "Do you want this job?" And I was like, "Oh, am I going to be making this money?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah, you're going to be making much more now." And I said, "No, I can't do it," because I knew if I take that job, I wouldn't become a director. And my boss said, "I was hoping you would say that," because he knew I wanted to be a director. And so I quit. I quit that job and then wrote my first movie, and it took place in Berlin, and I got it financed in Berlin, and I went back to Berlin and made it there.
Perfect. Tell me something. What was the biggest challenge to adapt the novel to Conclave?
I think the biggest challenge to keep believing in the simplicity of the story or the clear arc of the character. It's driven by dialogue. And sometimes when you hear that dialogue 40 times a day, and you realize, is it still interesting? Is it interesting enough? And there's a temptation to become, you know, to make crazy stuff with the camera, like gimmicks with the camera. And you have to keep reminding yourself, I loved the script when I first saw it. I thought it was enough. It's still enough. So resist all temptation to make it fancy and strange camera moves and crazy light and so forth. Just keep it simple and follow the characters. That was actually the biggest challenge.
And you have a great story, but I like to know how do you imagine the characters and the actor? How difficult was the process of the casting?
That's always difficult, but in this case, after a few years, the main character was Italian, but we wanted to keep our mind open to, any nationality that is believably Catholic. And we looked all over the world, and at some point I thought, who it should be? It should be Ray Fiennes, because he's someone who can express with his eyes what he's thinking. And this character is thinking a lot. He's not saying the most. He's actually quite quiet, content with being in the third row, content. He doesn't want to be in the limelight. And so you really need to be able to see what goes on behind his eyes. And Ray Fiennes is wonderful at doing that. And then around him, I wanted to assemble a cast of opposites, basically. Stanley Tucci very much feels opposite Ray Fiennes, and so does Sergio Castellito, you know, as a much more lively character. And just to assemble pieces from all over the world, Isabella Rossellini, John Lithgow, Lucien Massamati, and to
Like a
hear that,
puzzle.
huh? Yeah, like a
Like,
puzzle. Yeah, and to hear the accents of different people, and it's all color. And that was very important to make it quite colorful and not have one tone the whole time.
and is this is a difficult or a challenge to have a cast of all over the world and with too many language?
Yeah, because I mean, you need to find someone who has the right level of accent. You know, if the accent is too strong, an actor's it's very difficult for them to speak English because they're going to lose their original language and the intuition for that language. And so thus I decided in some case just to keep it Italian, because obviously, believably, in the Vatican, there would be a lot of Italian and Latin. And so Rafe had to learn a lot of Italian, a lot of Latin, just to keep it normal, you know, to make it feel like he's lived there for 20 years.
I think we are reading time, but I like to know your work here in Argentina it has a big repercussion, and also your name because you won us over the Oscar with when Argentina 1985 compete with All Quiet. I like to know how do you live this that year that you win the Oscar and has this competition or with our film but other films.
Well, you know, it was never a competition really. And Santiago is a great filmmaker, and I really loved that film. I loved meeting him, and I can't wait for his next film. It's, you know, sometimes it goes that way, sometimes the other way. And Santiago won the Golden Globe. There you go. So he won one, I won the other. So that's fine. So we're even.
Of course. The last one. Here in Argentina has a big repercussion. One thing that you say in San Sebastian that the Pope was the greatest director in the world. I like to know how or what made you think that way.
Well, he has absolute power. He doesn't. It's not a democracy. It's he can decide. Obviously, he, you know, has political fractions, but he can decide any law or any, you know, he can just decide it. He doesn't have to ask anyone. He's a de facto you know, like a, you know, an autocrat who doesn't, there's no democracy, there's no people who vote for something. He has a government, and that government probably puts pressure on him, but ultimately he can decide on his own.
Of course. Edward, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Say hi to Santiago, please.
Thank you.